The moment my 6-year-old pointed at the man with the gun and said, "Mommy, is that my daddy?" I knew 6 years of running was over. I remember the exact quality of the afternoon light. The way it fell across the pavement outside Hartwell Elementary in that flat, indifferent February way that doesn't care what it's illuminating. I remember the sound of other children, the ordinary, beautiful chaos of school pickup, backpacks and lunchboxes, and the specific, uncomplicated joy of small people released into the afternoon. And I remember how that sound continued around us, oblivious, while my entire world came to its absolute, final stop. I remember the man's face when Marco said it. The way he went very still, not with the stillness of surprise, because these were not men who were surprised by things, but with the stillness of something that had not been included in the operational briefing, and that required a specific, suspended moment to process. I remember that I could not breathe. And I remember thinking, in the specific, strange clarity that arrives in the worst moments, the moments so large that the ordinary fear response cannot contain them, and the mind goes somewhere clean and precise instead, that I had spent 6 years building a life designed to prevent exactly this moment, and that in the end, it had not been a mistake or a careless slip or a failure of the careful, grinding vigilance I had maintained since the night I disappeared. It had been something entirely simpler and more devastating than any of those things. It had been my son's eyes, which were his father's eyes, which were the kind of eyes that people who knew Douglas Meadows recognized the way they recognized the city's skyline, as a fixed reference point that was always there and always meant the same thing. Someone had seen Marco's eyes, and now his father's men were at the school gate. My name is Amy Moreno. I was 26 when I fell in love with the most dangerous man in the American Southeast. I was 27 when I ran from him in the dark with nothing but a bag and the 6-week knowledge that I was carrying his child. I was 33 when his men found me at a school gate in Asheville, North Carolina, on a February afternoon that had not asked anyone's permission to become the day everything ended. This is the story I have been carrying for 6 years. All of it. Even the parts that don't make me look like the woman I've tried to become. Especially those parts, because they're the ones that explain how I ended up at a school gate with a 6-year-old who had inherited his father's eyes and used them to end 6 years of running in approximately 4 seconds. I am going to tell you everything. From the beginning. Subscribe before we go 1 second further. Because what Douglas Meadows does the moment he sees Marco for the first time, after 6 years of searching, is the moment this story changes from everything you think it is into something you could not have prepared for. You need to be here when it happens. I was not a woman who belonged in that world. I want to be clear about this from the beginning because stories like mine are often told in a way that makes the woman seem like she should have known, like there were signs so obvious that only someone who wanted to be deceived could have missed them. I want to be accurate rather than self-protecting, which means I have to say both things. I did not belong in that world, and I also made choices that moved me closer to it with every step, and the fact that I did not fully understand what I was stepping into does not absolve me of the stepping. I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina. My parents were both teachers. My mother Vivian taught elementary school, and my father Gareth taught high school history, and they raised me in the specific, loving, practically minded way of people who had made their peace with modest means and found that the peace was more than sufficient. I studied journalism at UNC, graduated at 22, and moved to Charlotte to take a position at a regional magazine that covered business and development in the Carolina corridor. I was covering a story about urban development investment in Charlotte when I met Douglas Meadows. He was 38. He was the managing principal of Meadows Development Group, which was, at its legitimate surface, one of the most active commercial development firms in the Southeast, warehouse conversions, mixed-use properties, the specific, visible kind of development that puts a person's name on buildings and plaques and at the head tables of Chamber of Commerce dinners. He was broad-shouldered and dark-haired, and had the specific, contained physical authority of someone whose stillness communicated more than most people's movement. He gave me 30 minutes for the interview. He gave me 2 hours. I told myself this was because I was good at my job. I was good at my job. But that was not the primary reason. I was 25 years old, and I was sitting across from a man who looked at me with the full, complete attention of someone who had decided I was worth every word I said, and I was not yet experienced enough in the specific varieties of powerful men to understand the difference between genuine attention and the strategic deployment of it. I understand the difference now. I am trying to be honest about the fact that I did not understand it then. I left the interview with a story, a business card, and the specific, buzzing quality of an afternoon that had been more than it started as. He called the next day, not for a follow-up quote, to ask if I wanted dinner. I should have said no. I understand this in retrospect with the absolute clarity of someone who has lived the consequences. I did not say no. What followed were the months that produced Marco, and the night that produced 6 years of running. And the school gate in February that produced the end of the running, and the beginning of everything that came after. This is that story. Looking back, the signs were there from the first dinner. I am a journalist. I am trained to notice the things that don't add up, to hold the inconsistency in my peripheral awareness while keeping my central attention on the conversation, to return to it later, to ask the question that the inconsistency demands when the moment is correct. I noticed the signs. I filed them in the category that every person who has ever loved someone they should not have loved creates in the architecture of their own denial. The category marked I will examine this more carefully when I am less occupied with how it feels to be in this man's company. The dinner was at a restaurant that had not yet opened to the public. I did not question this at the time, which tells me what I need to know about the quality of my critical faculties in those first weeks. I sat in a beautiful room that was technically not available and ate food that had been prepared by a chef who was technically off-duty and thought, he arranged this for me. I did not think, who arranges this and how and why, and what does the capacity to arrange it mean about the nature of the person doing the arranging? He was at the table, and in the weeks that followed, everything that was most disarming in a man. Attentive without being performatively attentive, the specific, genuine kind that comes from actually listening rather than from the social management of the appearance of listening. Funny in the dry, economical way of someone who finds the world genuinely absurd rather than in the performed way of someone using humor as a management tool. Honest, or presenting as honest, with the specific quality of someone who had decided that the management of information was less effective in the long run than the strategic delivery of accuracy. He never lied to me. I have to say this clearly because it is both true and irrelevant, and the combination of true and irrelevant is itself a form of the lesson I was learning without knowing I was being taught. He never told me a single thing that was untrue. He simply never told me the whole truth. And the gap between the true things and the whole truth was the gap that eventually contained everything. I noticed the men around him. Not bodyguards in the theatrical sense. They were more integrated than that, present in the way of furniture that is both decorative and structural, serving multiple functions simultaneously. I noticed that the business card he had given me listed Meadows Development Group and nothing else, and that the Meadows Development Group's public profile was thorough and convincing and, I would later understand, the most precisely constructed version of a surface that I had ever encountered. I noticed that when I asked him, at the fourth dinner, about a specific development contract that I had come across in my research, a waterfront property that had changed hands 3 times in 6 months through intermediary entities that my journalist's instinct had flagged as unusual, he looked at me for a moment with an expression that was not the managed version and was not the dinner version, and that contained, for approximately 2 seconds, the full, unfiltered quality of a man whose primary mode of operating was not the restaurant with the attentive eyes and the dry humor. Then the expression was gone. He answered my question with the accuracy that was his method. He explained the property's history in terms that were technically correct, and that did not explain why the intermediary entities existed or what they were for. I filed the inconsistency. I returned to how it felt to be in his company. I fell in love with him at the 6-week mark. Not dramatically, in the specific, accumulating way that real love arrives, through the weight of consistent presence and genuine attention, and the slow, irreversible process of a person becoming the organizing principle of your interior world without announcing the organizing. He told me he loved me at the 8-week mark. He said it in the flat, accurate tone of someone stating a fact that did not require emotional performance to be true, and I recognized it as the most honest thing he had said to me, which told me something about the category of statement. It was without my fully understanding the category yet. I was 6 weeks pregnant when I understood what Douglas Meadows actually was. Not from him. Not from the careful, precisely true things he had told me. From a night that I was not supposed to be part of, on a schedule that no one had anticipated, in a building that I had arrived at 40 minutes ahead of the time I had told him I would arrive because I had finished the work I was doing and had thought, with the simple, unguarded warmth of someone who is in love and acts on it, that he would be happy to see me early. He was not there yet. His men were, and the thing I walked into was not a development meeting. I stood in the doorway of the building's upper office for 4 seconds before anyone noticed me. In those 4 seconds, I saw enough. I saw the specific, undeniable, absolute truth of Douglas Meadows' full business. Not the development portfolio, not the Chamber of Commerce dinner version, but the version that the intermediary entities existed to protect, and that the restaurant and the attentive eyes had been positioned like beautiful furniture around a structural wall. I turned. I walked out. I went to my car. I drove to my apartment. I sat in my apartment for 3 hours. Then I packed a bag. I withdrew cash from 2 ATMs. I got on a bus. I did not leave a note. I did not say goodbye. I did not stop loving him, which was the most complicated part, and the part that has required the most management in the 6 years since. I left because I loved what was growing inside me more than I loved anything else I had ever loved or would love. And what was growing inside me would not be born into the world I had just seen. Running looks different from the inside than it does from the outside. From the outside, I imagine it looks like fear. And fear is part of it. The specific, ambient, low-frequency fear that lives in the back of your awareness and never fully goes away, that wakes you at 3 a.m. with a particular, cold quality of a sound that was probably nothing but cannot be confirmed as nothing until you are out of the bed and at the window and have accounted for the street below. Fear is part of running, but it is not the primary experience. The primary experience is love. I know how that sounds. I have said it to myself every day for 6 years, and it still sounds like the kind of thing a person says when they are trying to make something painful sound meaningful. But it is accurate, and accuracy is what I owe this story. The primary experience of 6 years of running was not the exhaustion or the loneliness or the 3 a.m. fear. It was Marco. It was the specific, total, complete love of a mother for a child, which is the most powerful thing I have ever been inside, which made everything else secondary. I was in Knoxville when he was born, a hospital where I had registered under a name that was not quite mine, a name close enough to be reflexive when called but different enough to create, in the administrative record, a version of me that Douglas Meadows' men would not find through the standard search vectors. I had been meticulous. I am a journalist. I knew what I was doing. Marco came out weighing 7 pounds 4 ounces, with his father's hair and his father's jaw and the specific, absolute quality of a person who had arrived with a complete personality that he had no intention of adjusting for anyone's convenience. He was born furious at the cold air and went still when the nurse placed him on my chest, and he found me, with his dark, newly arrived eyes, in the specific, animal way of newborns locating the thing they already know. He had his father's eyes. I understood this in the first 2 minutes, and I held the understanding with the specific, daily discipline of a woman who had decided that this fact was not a tragedy, but a responsibility. Every day that I looked at Marco was a day I was reminded of what I had left and why I had left it and what I owed to the decision I had made. We moved 4 times in 6 years. Not frantically, deliberately, with the measured, professional attention of someone who is managing the running as a system rather than reacting to it as a crisis. Knoxville for the first year. Then Chattanooga, where I found work at a small digital publication and built enough income to be stable and enough routine to be something close to ordinary. Then Greenville, South Carolina for 2 years, which was the longest we stayed anywhere, where Marco started school and made friends and began the specific, joyful project of becoming himself in the world. And then Asheville, which I had chosen because it was large enough to be anonymous and small enough to know its rhythms, because the mountain geography felt like a buffer against the flat, searchable geography of places that were easier to cover and therefore easier to find, and because there was a community there, a loose, warm, specific kind of community that produced, for Marco, the closest thing to extended family either of us had had since Raleigh. He asked about his father for the first time when he was 4. The way 4-year-olds ask, directly, without the social awareness that would have made the question more manageable, in the middle of a Tuesday morning while I was making his lunch. "Where's my daddy?" I had a version of the answer prepared. I had been preparing it since before he was born. The version I gave him was accurate at the level of a 4-year-old's capacity to receive it. His father was someone I had known who lived far away, who did not know about Marco yet, who was in a complicated situation that I would tell him more about when he was older. The version was true at every point at which I deployed it and said nothing about the rest. He accepted it. 4-year-olds are generally willing to accept an answer that contains a promise of more information later, as long as the more information later is delivered with the specific, present warmth of a parent who is genuinely there even when a specific answer is deferred. He asked again at 5. At 6, 2 weeks before the February afternoon, he stopped asking and started looking. I noticed the looking. It had a different quality than the asking, more patient, more searching, the specific, intelligent observation of a child who has understood that the question lives in the world around him rather than in the answers available in the apartment. He had his father's eyes. And his father's way of looking at things, the complete, unhurried, total attention that had been the first thing I had found disarming in Douglas Meadows and that I encountered every day in our son, and that I loved and managed in the specific, dual-register way that I managed most things that related to the fact of his father. The near miss came in the 3rd year. A man in a Chattanooga parking lot who had looked at Marco with a specific, arrested quality of someone who had seen a face they recognized in a place they did not expect it. I had not waited to confirm the assessment. We were in Greenville within 48 hours. I had been right to move. I understood this when, 2 months after settling in Greenville, a contact I maintained for exactly this purpose confirmed that a search had been active in Chattanooga during the weeks following the parking lot. He was looking. He had always been looking. I had always known he was looking. What I had not known was that 6-year-old boys have their father's eyes in a way that school enrollment photographs record faithfully. Marco asked where his daddy was at 4 years old. By 6, he had stopped asking and started looking. Subscribe, because the specific mistake that gave us away is not what you're expecting, and when Amy finds out what it was, it changes how she understands every decision she made. I made one mistake. I want to be precise about this because 6 years of careful, grinding vigilance deserves a precise accounting of where the vigilance failed. I changed our names. I used cash where I could. I avoided social media for myself completely and managed Marco's digital footprint with the focused, professional attention of a journalist who understood exactly how much a digital footprint could reveal and exactly how to minimize it. But I enrolled him in school. I enrolled him because he was 6 and children are required by law to be in school, and because Marco was the kind of child for whom learning was not a nicety but a necessity, a child who had his father's complete, absorbing attention, and who directed that attention at the world with a curiosity so comprehensive that it would have been a cruelty to deprive him of the environment designed to meet it. I enrolled him under our working name and with the documentation I had built over 6 years, which was convincing at the standard school district administrative level because school districts are not the level at which people who have been looking for you for 6 years operate. But school enrollment generates photographs. In the 21st century, school enrollment generates photographs that are digitized and stored in administrative systems that are, despite their institutional framing, searchable by people with the right kind of access. Class photographs, school portrait packages, the specific annual archive of a child's face recorded at institutional intervals that, strung together, create a longitudinal record of a face developing over time. The face that developed over time in Hartwell Elementary's enrollment photographs was Marco's face, which was his father's face, in the specific, documented, searchable way that school enrollment photographs provide. I learned this later. At the time, I only knew that something was wrong. I felt it on the Monday before the February afternoon. Not a specific event, not a visible sign, but the specific low-frequency disturbance in the ambient atmosphere of our days that I had learned over 6 years to trust as information. The feeling that the shape of the ordinary had changed in a way that the ordinary had not announced. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had been doing this for 6 years, and the paranoia and the vigilance existed on the same register and were sometimes indistinguishable, and the cost of treating paranoia as intelligence was the exhausting, constant upheaval of moving, the disruption to Marco, the rebuilding, the specific, grinding labor of starting over. I had done it 4 times. I could not do it for a vague feeling on a Monday. I should have done it for a vague feeling on a Monday. On the Wednesday, 2 days before the afternoon, I noticed a car on the street outside our apartment building that had not been there before. Black, angled toward the entrance, with the specific, practiced patience of something that was waiting rather than parked. I looked at it from the second-floor window for 10 minutes. It did not move. It was not identifiable as belonging to anyone in the building. I moved away from the window. I told myself it was a visitor from another building. I made dinner. I helped Marco with the reading project he was bringing to school Friday, a small, illustrated account of a dinosaur who was afraid of the dark, which Marco had declared was not realistic because dinosaurs were not afraid of anything. I told him some things are afraid even when they seem powerful. He looked at me with his father's eyes and said, "Are you afraid of anything, Mommy?" I said no. I had been lying to him about this specific subject for 6 years, and I was practiced at it. On Thursday evening, the car was gone. I breathed. I told myself, paranoia. I told myself, tomorrow is Friday and Marco has his dinosaur project and the weekend is coming and nothing is wrong. Friday was the February afternoon. I picked Marco up at 2:45, which was my standard pickup time, early enough to beat the primary pickup rush, which I had adopted not entirely for logistical reasons. He came through the school's side entrance with the specific, full-body energy of a child who has had a good day and wants to tell someone about it. Backpack bouncing, dinosaur project rolled and clutched under one arm, his face doing the thing it did when he was about to narrate something at speed. He was 3 feet from me when I saw the men. 2 of them. Positioned near the gate with the specific, practiced casualness of people who were performing casualness rather than embodying it. Not in suits, in the kind of clothing that read as ordinary until you looked at the quality of it, which was the quality of people who did not economize. One of them was broad-shouldered. He had a particular way of standing, weight-balanced, hands loose, the specific, contained readiness of someone whose body had been maintained as a professional asset. He had the build and the posture that Marco had never seen on a person who was not his own reflection in the photographs I kept from when Douglas and I were together. The photographs I kept, against every instinct of the running, in the bottom of the bag I always carried. I had kept them for Marco, so he would know what his father looked like. He knew what his father looked like. Marco stopped. He looked at the broad-shouldered man with a specific, total, complete attention that was his father's attention operating in his 6-year-old face. He looked at the man for a long moment with the searching quality he had been developing for weeks. Then he looked up at me, and then he said it. "Mommy, is that my daddy with a gun?" The sentence arrived in the February afternoon with the specific, absolute quality of something that cannot be unsaid. Not loud, quiet. In the particular, carrying clarity of a child's voice asking an honest question. Loud enough for the man to hear. Loud enough for his colleague to hear. The broad-shouldered man went still. He looked at Marco. He looked at me. He looked at Marco again. And the world that I had built over 6 years in 4 cities, with the focused, grinding, daily discipline of a woman who loved her son more than her own peace, came to its complete and total stop. The broad-shouldered man's name was Aldrich. I would not learn this until later. At the moment, he was simply the man whose stillness in the face of Marco's question told me everything I needed to know about the quality of his training and the seriousness of the situation. He looked at Marco with the expression of a man who has received a piece of information he did not have before and is deciding, in real time, how to weight it against the operational parameters of the afternoon. Then he looked at me. "Ms. Moreno," he said. Not a question. An identification in the specific, flat register of someone for whom the confirmation of identity was a procedural formality, rather than a discovery. "I don't know who you are," I said. This was the first thing my brain produced, and it was not entirely a lie. I did not know his name, and it was also absolutely not true at the level of what I understood about who he was in relation to who had sent him. "Mr. Meadows would like to see you," he said. 6 years. I had spent 6 years preparing myself for the possibility of this sentence. I had rehearsed, in the specific, late-night way of a person who cannot stop the mind from preparing for its own worst outcomes, every version of how I might respond when it came. I had imagined myself with the focused clarity of the woman I had tried to become, the woman who had run deliberately and would, if necessary, face the consequences of the running with the same deliberateness. My mind went blank, not with terror, with the specific, total nullity of a system that has been running a complex process for 6 years and has just received a signal that the process has reached its terminal point. The operating system was shutting down because the thing it had been operating toward had arrived. Marco was looking at me. He had felt the change in the air the way children feel everything, through the body, without language, with the complete, animal accuracy of a small person who lives at a frequency that adults have organized themselves out of. His hand found mine with the specific, trusting grip of a child who has understood that something is wrong and who has identified the correct person to hold on to. I held his hand. I held it with the focused, deliberate attention of a woman who is going to maintain her composure in front of her son because her son required that she maintain her composure and because Douglas Meadows' men were not going to see me come apart at a school gate. "I have my son with me," I said. In the flat, steady voice I found somewhere underneath the system shut down. "I know," Aldrich said, without inflection. "He is not a part of this," I said. "He is precisely the part of this that Mr. Meadows is most interested in," Aldrich said. Not unkindly, with the specific, accurate bluntness of a man who had decided that the most professional version of the afternoon was the honest one. I looked at Aldrich. I looked at the other man, who had the contained, watchful quality of someone performing a perimeter function. I looked at Marco, who was looking at Aldrich with the focused, curious attention of a child who has asked a question about a gun and has not yet received an answer to it, and who is not going to forget that the question was asked. "Is there a gun, Mommy?" Marco said. "No, buddy," I said. This was probably a lie. I did not examine it. "Aldrich has a gun," Marco said, with the specific, matter-of-fact accuracy of a child who had been told not to lie and had internalized this as a universal operating principle. Aldrich looked at Marco with an expression that was not the professional expression. Something underneath it. Something that was the involuntary register of a man being addressed directly by a 6-year-old with his employer's face. "Your son is perceptive," he said to me. "Yes," I said. "He is." The car was on the street outside the school. Not the black car from Wednesday, a different one, also black, also communicating through its very quality the category of person who had sent it. Aldrich indicated it with a contained, professional gesture of someone who was not forcing anything and was also not pretending that the choice was entirely mine. I looked at the car. I looked at Marco. I thought about running, the specific, instant calculation of whether there was a direction to run in that did not contain the alternative version of what happened if I ran. I calculated it in the 4 seconds available and arrived at the answer that I had always known I would arrive at if this moment came. There was no direction. We got in the car. Marco sat next to me and looked out the window at the passing city with the focused, absorbing interest he brought to everything. He had his dinosaur project in his lap. He did not appear frightened. He asked at the 2-minute mark whether we were going somewhere fun. I said we were going to meet someone. He said, "Is it my daddy?" I said, "I think so, buddy." He thought about this for a moment. Then he said, "I drew him a picture once. In kindergarten. I still have it." I looked at my son. I thought about all of it. The 6 years, the 4 cities, the 3 a.m. fear, and the daily love, and the enrollment photograph, and the Wednesday car, and the February afternoon that had produced this specific, impossible, unavoidable moment. "I know you did," I said. He reached into his backpack. He had the picture. Not the kindergarten one, a new one, done in the week before, in the searching phase, with his father's complete and absorbing attention directed at a piece of paper and a box of crayons and the specific, focused intent of a child making something for someone specific. He held it in his lap, all the way to the building. Marco had a drawing in his backpack the whole time. He made it in the week before they were found, during the searching phase. Subscribe, because what Douglas Meadows does when a 6-year-old hands him a crayon drawing is the moment that every person in that room, including his own men, was not prepared for. The building was not what I expected. I had expected, in the specific, dread-constructed imagination of 6 years, something that communicated Douglas Meadows' world the way his world announced itself when it was not being managed. Something that said, "This is where the power lives, and the power is not gentle." The building was a converted warehouse in Charlotte's South End, legitimate, beautiful in the specific, expensive way of spaces that have been transformed with both resources and intention, with a kind of architectural integrity that comes from someone who actually cared how it looked rather than someone who needed it to look like caring. The lobby had the warm, clean quality of a space that was used daily and was managed well. I understood in the elevator that this was the legitimate portion. The portion that the Meadows Development Group's profile described accurately. I understood this the way I had understood things about Douglas since the beginning, not through what was visible, but through the relationship between what was visible and what was present in the gap around it. Marco was looking at the elevator buttons with the focused, comprehensive interest of a child for whom elevator buttons are always worth examining. "Can I push the button?" he said. Aldrich indicated the button. Marco pressed it with the specific, satisfied completeness of a child who has been allowed to press the elevator button and considers the day improved by the fact. He looked up at Aldrich. "Thank you," he said. Something happened in Aldrich's face. Not something large, something small and involuntary, the specific, unplanned register of a man being thanked by a child with his employer's face and his employer's eyes and his employer's complete, absorbing attention, and finding the experience disarming in a way that his training had not included. The floor we arrived at was quiet. A long corridor. Good lighting. The contained, professional efficiency of a space that was used for things that required both competence and discretion. And at the end of the corridor, in the room with the open door, was Douglas Meadows. He was standing at the window, his back to us. I had a moment, 4 seconds, maybe 5, to look at him before he turned. And in those seconds I did the thing I had been not doing for 6 years, which was to look at Douglas Meadows in the full, unmanaged way rather than the managed version I had maintained in my memory in order to make the managing of everything else possible. He was 44 now. He had the specific, settled quality of someone who had been carrying significant weight for a significant time and had organized himself structurally around the carrying, not bowed by it, reinforced by it, the way certain materials become stronger under sustained load. He was wearing a dark suit that had the quality of something that had been put on as a function rather than a performance. His hands were in his pockets. He turned. He looked at me first. The specific, total, complete version of his attention that had been the first and most disarming thing about him, and that had not, in 6 years, become any easier to receive. He looked at me with 6 years in his face. Not the anger first, which surprised me, not the cold fury that I had expected and had been prepared to absorb. The specific, complicated, layered thing of a man who has been searching for a very long time and is now looking at what he was searching for and does not yet know which of the available responses is the accurate one. He looked at me for 4 seconds. Then he looked at Marco. He looked at Marco, and the 6 years in his face reorganized themselves into something that did not have a professional category. Something that was not the development group or the Chamber of Commerce dinner or the world that I had run from and that I had spent 6 years trying to protect my son from. He looked at Marco the way you look at something you have been trying to hold in your mind for 6 years and have never been able to hold accurately because the thing has been growing and changing without you, and now it is in front of you at 6 years old with your own face on it. And the gap between what you imagined and what is actually there is so large that the imagining was not, in any meaningful sense, the same thing as this. He did not speak for a long moment. Neither did I. Marco looked at the man at the end of the room. He looked at him with the searching, total, complete attention that had been developing for weeks. He looked at him for approximately 3 seconds. Then he walked toward him. Not because I indicated it, not because anyone told him to, because he had the specific animal accuracy of a child who has been looking for something and has located it, and the looking was finished. He walked to Douglas Meadows, and he stood in front of him, and he held up the drawing. "I made this for you," he said. "I didn't know your name, but I knew what you looked like." The room was completely still. Aldrich, at the door behind us, was still. The other man, who had positioned himself near the window, was still. I was not breathing. Douglas Meadows looked at the drawing. He looked at it for a long moment. Not the professional attention, not the managed version, but the full, undefended version of a man looking at a crayon drawing made by a 6-year-old who had never met him and had drawn his face from the eyes that looked back at him in the mirror. He crouched down. Not the practiced crouch of someone managing a situation, the genuine, specific movement of a very large man making himself the right size for a very small person. He went to one knee on the floor of a room where I had never, in 3 years of knowing him, seen him be anything other than the most upright person in it. He looked at Marco's level. "What's your name?" he said, in the voice that was not the professional one. "Marco," my son said. "What's yours?" "Douglas," he said. Marco considered this. "That's a good name," he said. "Mine is Marco Moreno, but maybe it could also be Marco Meadows. I like the Ms." Douglas Meadows looked at his son. The most dangerous man in the American Southeast had nothing, in that moment, to say. He found his voice with me in a different room. The one without Marco, which was the room I had been waiting for and dreading in the specific, anticipatory dread of someone who knows the bill is coming and cannot yet account for the full amount. Aldrich had taken Marco to another space. I heard, through the wall that was doing very little to contain the sound of my son, the specific, carrying joy of a 6-year-old who has been introduced to a room with a television and a couch and what appeared, from the exclamations, to be a refrigerator containing an impressive selection of juice boxes. Marco's capacity to adapt to new environments with total, happy confidence was one of his father's qualities operating in its most uncomplicated form, and I held on to the sound of it the way you hold on to something in the dark. Douglas was standing at the far side of the room. He had put the drawing in his jacket's inner pocket. I had watched him do this. I had watched him do it with the specific, deliberate care of someone who is not performing the care, but simply ensuring the thing was where it would not be damaged, and I had felt, in the watching of it, the specific, compound emotion that had no simple name, the thing that is grief and love and guilt and relief all occupying the same space simultaneously. "You ran for me," he said. Not loudly. Douglas Meadows did not need volume. He had the specific, contained quality of someone whose authority required no amplification, the kind of voice that was more present in a room at its quietest than most voices at their loudest. Yes, I said.
6 years, he said.
Yes. I had people looking, he said. 3 continents. 6 years. I know, I said. He looked at me. The full, unmanaged version. Why? And this was the question I had been preparing to answer for 6 years and which I found, now that it was in front of me, exactly as difficult as I had known it would be. Not because the answer was complicated. The answer was simple. Because the simple answer required me to stand in front of Douglas Meadows and tell him that what I had run from was him. Not the abstract threat of his world or the impersonal danger of his operations. Him. The specific, concrete fact of what he was and what that meant for a child born into it. I saw what you are, I said. The night I left. I came to the building early, and I saw. I stopped. I held his gaze. I know what I saw. He did not look away. He did not attempt to qualify or explain or position. He looked at me with the flat, accurate directness that had always been his method for things he had decided not to manage. Yes, he said. You saw it. I was pregnant, I said. I had been pregnant for 6 weeks, and I knew, in the second I walked through that door, that the thing growing inside me could not be born into a world where that was what his father did. You could have told me, he said. And said what?
I said,
Douglas, I'm pregnant, I love you. Please become someone different? I held his gaze. You wouldn't have become someone different. You would have put me somewhere safe and kept everything else exactly as it was, and my son would have grown up inside your protection, which means inside your world, which means inside the specific, inherited danger of being the heir to what you've built. He was quiet. I was not wrong, I said. No, he said. You were not wrong. And the admission had the specific, heavy quality of something that cost him considerably more than the sentence suggested. We stood in the room for a long time. He called me Douglas, he said. Eventually. Not with the anger anymore, with the specific, slightly stunned quality of a man who has been called by his first name by a child who gave him a drawing and suggested their surnames might share a letter. He has your directness, I said. He has your intelligence, he said. He has your eyes, I said. I know, he said. I know that already. The anger came back in the evening. Not at me, not the fury of the confrontation, which had been the genuine, direct version of what 6 years had cost him. Something else. Something operational. I saw it in the quality of Aldrich's entrance, the specific, compressed register of a man delivering information that required immediate processing, and in the change in Douglas's posture when he received it. He crossed to me. He said, in a low voice that was not the anger version, and was not the confrontation version, but was the version I had only heard once before, on the night I walked into the building and turned around and ran. There is a situation. What kind of situation? I said. The kind that involves Marco, he said. Not from my direction. From the outside. I looked at him. Someone knows he exists, Douglas said. Someone who is not on my side of the equation. And they knew before today, which means the finding was not only mine. The cold moved through me, not the 6 years of ambient fear, the specific, acute, clarifying cold of a new category of danger that was not the one I had been running from. I had spent 6 years protecting my son from his father's world. I had not fully accounted for the possibility that the world would come for him regardless, that the protection his father could provide was not something I could replicate in Asheville, North Carolina, with a working name and a careful digital footprint. What do we do? I said. Douglas Meadows looked at me. We, he said. We, I said. The most complicated word I had said in 6 years. Someone outside Douglas's organization already knew Marco existed before the school gate. They knew before Aldrich did. Subscribe because who it was and how long they had known is the twist that reorganizes every decision Amy made during 6 years of running. The name was Renwick Slate. He had been Douglas's right hand for 11 years. He had been in the operational vocabulary of the Meadows organization, the specific, indispensable category of person whose function was so integrated into the structure's daily management that removing him was not a simple operation but a structural one, requiring the patient, sequential dismantling of the things he had made himself necessary for before the removal could happen without damaging what he was removed from. I learned this in the 2 hours after Douglas told me there was a situation. I learned it in the compressed, operational briefing that Douglas delivered to me with the same focused accuracy he had always brought to things he had decided I needed to understand. Not managed, not filtered, the full version because we had arrived, in the room after the confrontation, at the specific and irreversible position of two people who needed each other's accurate information and who had run out of time for the managed versions. Renwick Slate had been the one who argued, 11 years ago, that the Meadows organization's expansion into the Southeast had to be consolidated under a single, protected operational structure, no family entanglements, no external dependencies, no personal vulnerabilities that could be weaponized by rivals. He had been the architect of the doctrine that Douglas had lived inside for 11 years, the doctrine that I had run from, and that Marco had been born outside of. He had been, for the past 8 months, in contact with the Varela network, which was the specific, operational rival whose existence Douglas had been managing for 3 years and whose recent incursion into the Carolinas market had been the primary operational pressure in Douglas's current situation. He had told the Varela network about Marco. Not in the past week. 8 months ago. Before the school enrollment photograph had been found by Douglas's search. Before Aldrich's team had located us. Renwick Slate had known about Marco for 8 months through his own network of contacts that operated in the margins of the Meadows organization's awareness, and he had provided the Varela network with a specific, operational gift, the location of Douglas Meadows' heir. The heir was leverage. In the specific, cold vocabulary of this world, a child was the most powerful leverage available. Not because anyone intended physical harm, which Douglas communicated to me with the flat, precise directness of someone who understood I needed that established first, but because the existence of a known heir changes the nature of an organization's vulnerability in ways that 6-year-olds do not need to understand, and that their mothers cannot afford not to. How long have they known where we are? I said. The current address, approximately 2 weeks, Douglas said. 2 weeks. The Wednesday car. The feeling on Monday. The car outside my building Wednesday, I said. He looked at me. You saw it. I told myself I was being paranoid, I said. You were not being paranoid, he said. I held this. I held the full weight of what it meant, that the 2 weeks of knowing had not been Douglas's people, that the surveillance outside my building had been from the direction I had not been looking. What does Renwick want? I said. He wants to use Marco's existence to create a negotiating position, Douglas said. Not against me directly, against my ability to operate. A man with a known heir who is publicly exposed and unprotected is a man whose decision-making has a specific, exploitable vulnerability that the Varela network can apply pressure to. He was going to expose Marco to force your hand, I said. He may already have done it, Douglas said. The timeline is not fully established. I looked at the wall. I thought about Renwick Slate, a name I had never heard, a man I had never met, the specific category of danger that I had not accounted for in 6 years of running, because I had been running from the version of the danger that I understood and had not fully modeled the version I did not. He's inside the organization, I said. Douglas said. In the specific, flat past tense of someone for whom the present and past tense of a person's operational status was a distinction with precise practical implications. I looked at him. I've been making decisions tonight, he said, about several things. I understood from the quality of the sentence that several things was not a figure of speech. Marco is not safe until the Varela network understands that the leverage no longer exists. Douglas said. Because Marco is not exposed. Because Marco is protected. How protected?
I said. He looked at me.
The full, direct, complete attention that had been the first disarming thing, and that had not, in 7 years, become any less present.
By me, he said.
If you'll allow it. I thought about what I had been protecting Marco from, and what I had been protecting him toward, and what 6 years of running had cost, and what staying would cost, and whether the cost of staying was something I could bear. I thought about a 6-year-old handing a crayon drawing to the most dangerous man in the American Southeast and suggesting their surnames might share an initial. I thought about the specific, terrible, clarifying love of a mother who has run out of directions to run in and is standing in a room with the one person who has the capacity to do what she cannot. Tell me what it looks like, I said. The Varela Network's move came 48 hours after Renwick Slate's removal from the operational picture. I was not present for the removal. I want to be accurate about this. Douglas did not include me in the operational decisions of the following 24 hours, and I did not ask to be included because the specific, adult honesty of our position required me to acknowledge what I was accepting when I accepted his protection, and what that acceptance meant about the nature of the world I was allowing Marco and me to be protected by. I had spent 6 years running from this world. I am not going to perform, in the telling of the story, a version of events in which the acceptance of Douglas Meadows' protection was a simple or uncomplicated decision. It was not. It was the most difficult decision I have made in my adult life, and I made it with the full, clear awareness of what I was deciding and what I was not deciding, and what the distinction between those two things would require me to manage for the rest of however long we were going to be alive. The Varela Network's move was, ultimately, the decisive version of their leverage attempt. It involved, as Douglas had anticipated, the public disclosure of Marco's existence to a specific set of people in the Carolina business community who were connected to the Meadows organization's legitimate operations and whose awareness of a previously unknown heir would produce, under ordinary circumstances, a specific kind of organizational disruption. Under ordinary circumstances, Douglas had made the disclosure first. Not to the people the Varela Network had targeted, to the entire relevant community, simultaneously through the specific, controlled mechanism of a man who understands that information can only be used as leverage once, and that the most effective counter-leverage is to remove the information's exclusivity before your opponent can deploy it. He told everyone about Marco.
Directly.
In his own words. In the specific, flat, accurate register that was his method for things he had decided not to manage. He told them his son had been living out of state for the past 6 years in circumstances that were the result of decisions made on both sides. He told them his son was 6 years old and was, in Douglas Meadows' assessment, the most perceptive person he had met in 44 years of encountering people. He told him Marco would be part of his life going forward, and that anyone in the room with an opinion about that was welcome to have the opinion privately. The Varela Network's leverage evaporated. The disclosure that was supposed to disrupt became the disclosure that demonstrated that Douglas Meadows had made his own decision about the most personal thing in his life on his own terms and on his own schedule, which was the only way Douglas Meadows made decisions, which was a quality the room understood and respected in the specific, professional way of people who operate in a world where the management of information is power and the decision to surrender information on your own terms is the most powerful version of its management. I was in the adjacent room with Marco when Douglas came back. Marco was asleep on the couch with the complete, total unconsciousness of a child who has had an extraordinary day and whose body has made the executive decision that the processing can wait until morning. He was holding the dinosaur project. He had the specific, peaceful quality of someone who has found something they were looking for and whose nervous system has finally been relieved of the work of the searching. Douglas stood at the doorway and looked at his son for a long time. I watched him look. "Is it done?" I said.
"For now," he said.
"What does for now mean?" I said. "It means the immediate situation is resolved," he said. "It means the longer situation is something we build toward rather than something we have arrived at." I held this. The longer situation being,
Marco, he said. You.
what this looks like. He turned from the doorway to look at me. I am not asking you to decide anything tonight. I am not asking you to decide the rest of it under the pressure of the past 48 hours. He paused. What I am asking is whether there is a version of what comes next that we build together rather than separately. I thought about 6 years. I thought about the 4 cities and the working name and the enrollment photograph and the Wednesday car and the February afternoon and the crayon drawing and the 6-year-old on one knee in front of the most dangerous man in the American Southeast saying I like the MS. I thought about what I had run from and what I had been running toward and what the direction of running looked like now that there was no direction left. There's a version, I said. I don't know its exact shape yet. Neither do I, he said. I need it to look a specific way for Marco, I said. I need the ordinary things to be available to him.
School.
A front door that is his. The specific, everyday safety of a child who is not managed as an asset.
Yes, he said.
And I need the honest version of everything, I said. Not the managed version. Not the true things that leave the whole truth out. If this is going to be anything, it is built on the full information.
He looked at me.
I have never lied to you, he said. I know, I said. I need you to start telling me the rest of it. He nodded. The nod of a man who has been asked something that will cost him, and who has decided the cost is correct. Marco made a sound in his sleep, the specific, small, satisfied sound of a child whose nervous system is finally doing the ordinary work of being 6 rather than the extraordinary work of searching. We both turned to look at him. He said our surnames share an initial, Douglas said. I heard, I said. He said. I confirmed. We stood in the doorway of the room where Marco was asleep with his dinosaur project, and I thought about all of it, the beginning and the running and the middle and the February afternoon and the crayon drawing and the knee on the floor, and the decision I was making in the specific, quiet, consequential way that the real decisions are always made, not dramatically, not with the full weight of the choice announced in theatrical terms, but in the ordinary, present, entirely real way of 2. People standing in a doorway watching a sleeping child. I need to call my mother, I said. She doesn't know any of this. She knows some of it, Douglas said. I looked at him. I found her 3 years ago, he said. I told her I was looking. I asked her if she knew where you were. He paused. She did not tell me, but she told me Marco was well. I held this. My mother Vivian, in Raleigh, who had said nothing to me about a phone call from Douglas Meadows, who had said nothing for 3 years, which was either a betrayal or the specific, mother-precise form of protection that I understood I was not ready to know. What did you say to her? I said. I told her I wanted to find you, he said, that the finding was not punitive, that I understood the running, and that what I wanted was, he stopped. The honest sentence pause. The sentence I gave her was that I wanted a chance to be someone Marco could know. I looked at the man I had run from for 6 years. I looked at him in the doorway, with the crayon drawing in his inside jacket pocket. I could see the edge of it, and with his son's face in his face and his complete and unhurried and total attention directed at me. You told my mother, I said. Yes, he said. And she kept it, I said. She is a remarkable woman, he said. I looked at Marco. I looked at Douglas. I looked at my son's face, the face that had been for 6 years, the daily reminder and the daily warning and the daily love, and I understood something that I had been moving toward for 6 years without knowing it. The running had been the protection I had. It was the correct protection for the situation I understood. And the situation I understood had changed on a February afternoon when a 6-year-old had looked at a man at a school gate and identified his father through a gun and said so out loud with the complete, uncomplicated accuracy of a child who has never been taught to manage what he sees. Marco had done what I had not been able to do. He had ended the running. Not by mistake, by being himself, which is a 6-year-old's only available method for most things and which was, I thought, exactly the right method. Okay, I said. Douglas looked at me. Okay, he said. We figure out the shape, I said.
Together.
Starting with the fact that Marco is going to want a juice box when he wakes up, and that whoever the most feared man in the American Southeast sends for the juice box should probably be someone Marco will find friendly. He looked at the doorway. Back at me. Aldrich, he said. Aldrich will do, I said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not the managed version, the real one. The one I had seen 3 times in 3 years of knowing him, and that I had been managing the memory of for 6 years. I ran to protect my son from his father's world, I said, out loud, to Douglas. Not as narration, as the sentence I had been carrying and was now setting down. I did not anticipate that one day his father's world would be the only thing keeping my son safe, or that the most feared man in the Carolina corridor would go down on one knee for a 6-year-old with a crayon drawing. Douglas was quiet, and I never imagined, I said, that I would be standing in a doorway deciding whether to trust the thing I ran from. But here I am, standing in the doorway. Here we both are, he said.
Marcos Terz.
He opened his eyes with the immediate, total wakefulness of a child who does not transition slowly from sleep to consciousness.
He looked at the doorway.
He saw us both. Are you my dad? He said to Douglas. Not with the searching quality of the school gate. With the settled, certain quality of a child who has already decided the answer and is asking for the confirmation. Douglas looked at his son.
Yes, he said.
Marco considered this for a moment. Okay, he said. Do you like dinosaurs? I can learn, Douglas said. Good, Marco said. Because I have a project. He held up the dinosaur project. The illustrated account of a dinosaur who is afraid of the dark. Douglas Meadows, the most feared man in the American Southeast, sat down on the couch next to his son. He held the project. He looked at the first page with a full, complete, absorbing attention that Marco had inherited and that Marco recognized as the correct form of attention for a project that had been worked on carefully. They read it together. I stood in the doorway and let them read. The end. From a February afternoon at a school gate and a 6-year-old who identified his father through a crayon drawing, to a doorway decision and a dinosaur project on a couch in Charlotte, Amy Moreno's story proves that the most protected things are not always the things we run to hide. Sometimes the running is the protection available, and the protection available is exactly right for exactly as long as it needs to be. And then a child does in 4 seconds what 6 years of vigilance could not. He simply sees the thing clearly and says it out loud, because children are not yet managing what they see, and sometimes the unmanaged version is the only one that moves anything. Renwick's slate is gone from the operational picture. The Varela network's leverage evaporated before it was deployed. Marco Moreno Meadows has a father who sat on a couch with him and read a dinosaur project. And Douglas Meadows has a drawing in his inside jacket pocket that he will not be removing. Hit subscribe for our next story. A woman who spent 8 years believing she was the only family her daughter had discovered on the day of her daughter's graduation, that someone has been present at every milestone. In the photographs she never looked at closely enough. The identity is someone from the life she walked away from. The conversation they have changes the account of 8 years in a single afternoon. See you there. Real talk. When Marco walked across the room and handed Douglas the drawing without being told to, was that the moment the story became irreversible? Yes. Because Amy could have managed the confrontation and possibly maintained some version of the running, but Marco's directness removed every negotiated position she had. No, the most irreversible moment was Douglas going down on one knee, because a man who has never knelt for anyone doing it for a 6-year-old has revealed something about himself that cannot be taken back. See, both Marco's directness and Douglas's response are the same moment seen from 2 directions, and both are required for the story to land where it lands. The most irreversible moment was Douglas telling Amy's mother 3 years ago that the finding was not punitive, because that sentence, kept by Vivian for 3 years, is the evidence that the man Amy ran from had already been changing before Marco handed him a crayon drawing. Drop your answer below. And tell us, have you ever been in a situation where the thing you were most protecting someone from turned out to be the only thing that could protect them? How do you make peace with the complexity of that? Also, Marco told Douglas their surnames share an initial. He had a drawing in his backpack that he made during the searching phase, before he had ever met his father. What does a child's certainty about something they have no confirmed information about tell us about what children actually know? Sound off in the comments. Because this story is about one thing underneath everything else: the cost of protecting something perfectly, and what happens when the protection has to change because the thing it was protecting has grown into a person with his father's eyes and his father's directness and absolutely no interest in being managed. What do you think?